This is the iAfrican Catch-Up with Yarik, Turianskyi and Stephen Gruzd. They're from the African Peer Review Mechanism program, which is located at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Hello Yarik, hello Stephen, thanks for joining me.
Hi Balungile, thanks for having us on your show.
Hi Balungile.
Perfect. So you guys wrote an article that's titled, Can Technological Advances Improve Governance in Africa? This was first published on the Mail and Guardian and also on the SIRE website. And we will provide a link to this. But can you tell me basically what the African Peer Review Mechanism program is all about?
So we are, as you said, a program at the South African Institute of International Affairs, which has been voted as Africa's top think tank, a public policy think tank for the last 5 or 6 years by the University of Pennsylvania, which does a big survey. And we track and monitor and write about and reflect on the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is a good governance monitoring and assessment tool. It was established in 2003 during the presidency of Thabo Mbeki in South Africa. It was very much one of his brainchildren, and it is a voluntary process where African countries sign up and agree to assess their governance in 4 broad areas: democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socio-economic development. It uses quite a complex questionnaire that asks many, many questions about all sorts of things from service delivery, macroeconomics, elections, human rights, rights of minorities, women, youth issues, corporate governance, a whole range of issues. And the country compiles a report. And once that self-assessment report is submitted to the Central APRM Secretariat, a team of experts comes and visits the country for a couple of weeks. They also do a report. These reports are put together. And finally, something called the Country Review Report is developed. Then the heads of state who are participating discuss that report. And there's a program of action which is meant to implement measures to overcome the gaps in governance that the self-assessment and the country review report have identified. It's called a national program of action. Countries are meant to then implement that and report on it periodically, and then they're meant to have second and subsequent reviews to see where they've made progress, to see where they haven't made progress, and again, all trying to improve governance in the country. That's as much of trying to get it into a very small nutshell.
Yeah, as you could hear, Balungile, it's a rather lengthy and technical and complicated process, which is unfortunately one of the reasons why it failed to capture the imaginations of African citizens. And now, 13 years after its inception, it's still quite unknown outside certain academic and elite and NGO circles.
And so, yeah, I mean, like you describe it includes sort of a low level to high level review, which is comprehensive. And like you say, it does sound quite ambitious. But in your article, you stated that good governance has to be pushed by the citizen. And then you go on to say the nature of the relationship between governments and ordinary people known as the social contract. And immediately when I saw social contract, I got excited because I know what that means. I studied sociology at Wits. But can you talk about this relationship between the citizens and governments? When you spoke about the African Peer Review Mechanism, you were also talking about other governments reviewing each other. But can we talk about that relationship between citizens and their own governments, and why technological advances would be important in this instance?
Well, Balungile, if you're saying the social contract, I'm sure you know that it's a philosophical concept that was developed in the past few centuries by various philosophers trying to understand the nature of the relationship between the citizen, the subject, and the government. And why do, at the end of the day, citizens choose to pay taxes, choose to obey laws? And it's based in that social contract so that in return for doing these things, the governments then provide citizens with protection from violence, providing security for them, but also providing them with certain goods. And those goods are, public access goods such as roads and lights, transportation, etc., protection from violence, as I mentioned, and, some sort of stability, some sort of security. Obviously, this varies from country to country, and that's why sometimes we think of failed states, for instance, Somalia, where the government is confined to perhaps controlling the central bank and a couple of blocks in the capital, but not so much the other areas of the country which descend into lawlessness and almost a situation of a state of nature, where every person has to fend for him or for herself. Obviously, information plays a key role here. And, if you look at the situation half a century ago, if you would live in a remote part from the capital, you might have to wait for a telegram to arrive before you would find out exactly what's going on. If there's been a revolution, if there's been a protest, if there's been a change of the government, people wouldn't find these things out for weeks and months at an end. Whereas now it's all, in your pocket. You can get all the major headlines and news on Twitter. You can find out exactly what's happening with the traffic situation, with potholes. There's plenty of Twitterati that provide these news. And obviously, it's starting to have an element of political accountability in it as well. We've seen it through organization of protests against certain governments in the Arab Spring, but we're also seeing other, more basic service delivery information and accountability. If your lights are all of a sudden, you check your prepaid meter and it still has cash in it, then you go on Twitter and then you tweet to your municipality and you're asking them, is this an outage? Has power station collapsed? What's happening? And it's much easier than for the citizen to communicate with his or her government.
Right. And you mentioned what we saw in the Arab Spring. I know that your article also mentioned Ushahidi, which is also an election monitoring tool in Kenya. We've also seen here in South Africa, roads must fall, fees must fall. But there are some limitations, right, of technology. You mentioned slacktivism. Can you talk a little bit about those limitations that we see where, yes, we can be ambitious and yes, we can be optimistic about what changes can happen in terms of governance, but where sometimes do we fall short?
So slacktivism is a new word that's entered the Oxford Dictionary in the last couple of years. And it's a kind of pejorative term for people who think they're activists but are actually slackers. And so by taking part in Twitter campaigns like, for example, Bring Back Our Girls in Nigeria for the schoolgirls that were abducted in Chibok, it went around the world in a couple of days. And people like Michelle Obama and others were holding up signs and tweeting photographs of themselves, and there was a buzz on Twitter. So people like to feel that they're doing something, but it's just pushing buttons on their phone or liking something on Facebook. And it takes a lot more to really make a change. Having said that, when enough people make a noise about something, it can indeed cause change, as we've seen in the Arab Spring and in the Fees Must Fall and the Roads Must Fall campaign. I mean, those were remarkable campaigns, all of them fueled by communication technology. For example, we're based on Wits University campus, and I know that during the Fees Must Fall, we were communicating by in a WhatsApp group as staff members, but certainly the protesters were also communicating with each other by WhatsApp and saying, where should they go and which entrances were blocked and etc. So yes, there are limits, and I think sometimes we expect technology to solve everything. Where you always have to have hard work, you have to have dedication, and you have to have a relationship, as you said earlier, between citizens and the state. And one of the things that the peer review mechanism tries to do, particularly in other African countries, in South Africa, we have lots of forums where citizens can interact with their government. We're quite a connected country. All the major institutions have websites and Twitter handles, and they do interact and respond to people. But in many other countries, that's not the case. And the opportunity to talk to somebody in government is extremely rare. And so what the peer review mechanism has inbuilt in it is the need for consultation with the public. Now, that can also be a very complex process, and who is talked to and when and how, and talks about power relationships. But in the end, it really does try to foster a partnership between citizens and their government, which is all too rare. I think citizens vote every 4 or 5 years on our continent, and sometimes they complain about the services that they don't get. But really, a chance to talk about policy and trying to influence it is quite rare on the continent.
Yeah, so technology is not a panacea. It provides a great tool for communication and for information, but that demand for accountability from the government still has to come from the citizen.
Great. And social media is a big one. We've already spoken about the Arab Spring and the hashtag must fall movements. And I know that it's a big one, especially amongst young people and politicians. Some politicians are very active on Twitter, as I've seen lately. Curious about your perspective on that in terms of young people. When we talk about governance, we often talk about high-level events that are happening happening often that are out of the reach of young people. So how do we use technology to sort of bridge that gap?
I think that, the spread of technology, the spread of smartphones in particular, which have far outstripped the landlines in Africa. We kind of just leapfrogged over that. We had so few landlines that with the new technology, cell phones have become ubiquitous, and particularly smartphones. And really, you have the power in your hands. You can communicate with your peers, with your friends, with your colleagues, and you can also communicate with institutions, with government departments. I think that the information needs to be packaged in a way that's appealing and attractive to young people. They, like older people, nobody wants to read a 500-page report. Stuff has got to be short, sharp, accessible, to the point. Use of pictures, use of graphics. But the world has become very democratized. And there's a lot of talk, for example, about citizen journalism. Even the big news organizations like CNN and BBC encourage people to take their own videos of news events and send them in. And they, it's no longer a one-to-one relationship. It's a many-to-many relationship, which brings with it all sorts of complications, but also has tremendous power. I mean, just one small example is in South Africa, we have the Outsurance Pointsman, which was a commercial company, an insurance company, decided to put up traffic officers to direct traffic. And they've developed an app where if you see traffic congestion in a particular place, you can suggest through geomapping and GPS technology that traffic cop gets put into that area to help alleviate the traffic. And there's a lot of that being done. You mentioned Ushahidi. They do a lot of that kind of stuff in Kenya. There's stuff like that going on in Tanzania. In many parts, there are all sorts of exciting experiments. And a lot of people who are driving this and doing this are younger.
Yeah, and at the same time, I find your question interesting in terms of how it can connect younger people to older politicians. Certainly from the one side, it makes the politicians appear a bit closer to the electorate. Instead of having to send a fax, write an email, a tweet is just the way where your phone is. And I mean, if you look at the example of cases of the official opposition in South Africa, sometimes it's been utilized very well with someone like Helen Zille, who's often responded to people that have asked her questions and challenged her on Twitter, and she very often responded to them. But at the same time, when they had the hashtag Ask Musi campaign, Twitter interview, that sort of backfired because perhaps not all the questions that they wanted were coming through. Similar examples can be brought with the ruling party as well, with the hashtag AskBlade, when lots of complaints were being raised about the fees must fall and the roads must fall campaign. So, it's on a case-to-case basis, and technology does provide that tool, but it's also unpredictable. And sometimes, the internet population can react in two very, very different ways in similar scenarios.
All right, so let's talk about those issues that one of you mentioned earlier. Let's talk about governing technological advances, because often policy takes a while to catch up with advancements that often take a while to build, but can often take off overnight. And sometimes that can be a good thing. What we saw again with the Arab Spring, with the use of Twitter, Facebook, and like you said, WhatsApp groups where we can communicate instantaneously. But as governance experts, what would your advice be for policymakers in terms of ensuring that these technological advancements are used for good and not for the bad?
It's very difficult to make value judgments on technology because technology at the end of the day is value neutral. Like you're saying, the internet can be used for good and it can be used for evil as well. It makes it easier not only for, let's say, like-minded people to get together to bring about social and political change, but also for terrorists to find each other and group together and commit atrocities and then spread their message of hate. But at the end of the day, personally, I believe in an open internet that's not controlled. Sure, you can have limitations and you can have rules, but at the end of the day, it becomes very difficult when governments try to control the internet. So ways must be found, better ways than currently exist, to make it self-regulating.
And also the other thing is I think there's a big move internationally for what's called open data, in getting information out there, putting data sets that many of these institutions are collecting all the time, releasing them, allowing people to play with them, to manipulate them, to experiment with them and come up with brilliant ideas. I was just at a conference in Cape Town on the Open Government Partnership, which is another tool for promoting good governance. And a lot of talk there was about open data and how making information available. Open data is connected to freedom of information laws and regulations. And those things are fundamental for governing these days. Government departments now put a lot of their forms online. They're going high tech. Soon you will be able to apply for your smart IDs electronically. I tried to do it the other day, actually, but it's only for people in the age group of 30 to 35 at the moment. So unfortunately, I'm a little bit older than that and wasn't able to do it. But governments are also learning from each other. I think many governments in the north are quite advanced and want to share their technology and share their ideas. And slowly, it's filtering into the global south, of which Africa is an important part. But we have wonderful innovations, very, very exciting things happening on the African continent in the realms of bringing governance and technology together, finding ways for people to make their life better through open information and access to that information.
Great. Is there anything that you gentlemen would like to add? Anything that I might have missed that you feel needs to be put out there?
Yeah, the one thing is we're looking for examples. We're looking for case studies of things that have really worked and that could potentially be spread to other countries where countries could learn from one another. That's one of the things that's very exciting about our work at the moment. And we are searching. We know lots of stuff's going on out there, but trying to put it together is a challenge. And we're always looking for good examples.
So how do people get in touch with you?
I guess they can find us on the SIRE website, which is www.sire.org.za, and then our email addresses are available there, or you can search for us on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Yarik and Stephen, from the African Peer Review Mechanism program, which is hosted at SIRE at Wits University. We've been speaking about how technological advances can improve governance in Africa, and we'll make available the contact details at the program. So anybody who's interested in getting involved can get in touch. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Balungile.
Thank you very much.